Amen. Well, thank you, Carrie, for that testimony, and it's going to play into what we're going to talk about later. But first, let me set the stage for you. You see, tensions around Jesus of Nazareth had been at an all-time high. In fact, the religious elite of the day were doing everything they can, including lie about who Jesus was, so that he could be mistried and eventually murdered. It wasn't a coincidence that it was also the time for the Jews to celebrate the Passover meal. And so Jesus, being a Jew, got his disciples, his closest followers, and his closest friends together and said, let's get together one last time to celebrate Passover. And so they gather in a place that we now call the upper room. And they get there and they're ready to celebrate and have a great time remembering God's deliverance of the Israelites out of Egypt. And Jesus notices that no one is washing each other's feet. Jesus didn't invent washing people's feet, but it would have been someone's job to do so, usually the lowest in standing or some sort of servant in the room. And so Jesus, doing what Jesus does, he leads by example. You'll see that throughout the message this morning. He gets up, removes his outer garments, ties a towel around his waist, and begins washing people's feet. And he comes to Peter, and Peter objects, but Jesus says, you don't understand what's going on right now, Peter, but one day, hopefully, you will. And to add to the tension in the room, Jesus says, actually, tonight also, one of you guys is going to betray me. And they take turns saying, is it me? Is it me? And Peter says, well, it's not me, Jesus, because I would never betray you. And he says, actually, Peter, you're going to pretend like you don't know me 3 times before the morning even comes. And so it's this really heavy thing in the room where they thought they were coming to celebrate Passover together, but Jesus is just laying it on. And then Jesus offers some comfort, and he says, listen, guys, I want you to know that I'm going to prepare a place for you, and when the time is right, I'm going to come back and get you. And Thomas says, but Jesus, we don't know where you're going. How will we know the way? And like a soft, underhand pitch, Jesus crushes one over the fence by saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. And then he says, by the way, I'm sending you a helper. And we know now that that would be the Holy Spirit. And that sets the tone for the rest of the message that Jesus will teach us today. I want to take a second to introduce myself. My name is TJ. I'm most notably the worship pastor. You see me up here jumping around playing guitar, but can we just give it a hand for our worship team this morning, filling in? Giving me the morning off. You guys crushed it. Thank you so much. I do a lot of things around here, so I can't list them all, but if I haven't got a chance to meet you yet, I will be hanging out after the service. I would love to get to know you and your family and talk about the Grove, and if we want to have a further conversation, I don't think we have lunch plans, correct me if I'm wrong, let's go to lunch, grab a bite, grab a drink, whatever you want. We're also in a series called We Are the Grove. We're talking about our vision as a church and these different sayings that we have about the church that we want to be. And so if you're new here, you've only been coming for a little while, perfect timing, because you're going to hear exactly what we stand for as the Grove. And today's message is called Be the Branch. This is a phrase that we use out of John 15, where we'll be later. If you want to go ahead and flip there or load your phones up there, or if you don't, it'll be on the screen for you. Be the branch. And we use this phrase in reference to growth. Because if you look at the top of your bulletin, the main idea this morning is that following Jesus demands growth both individually and collectively. So keep that in mind this morning as we go through these scriptures. That following Jesus demands growth both individually and collectively as a church. Now, if you've ever heard me preach before, I like to read a little bit, break it down, read a little bit, break it down. I know that can be jarring. So this morning, I think to stay in the moment of the upper room with Jesus, the very last night he was a free man on earth, let's just read what he teaches us in John 15, 1 through 17, all the way through, and then we're going to break it down. Here we go. Jesus says, I am the vine, the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. And he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and they're thrown into the fire to be burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it'll be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you will bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands, and I remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command to you is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. See, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. See, you didn't choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, to love one another. So, church, this morning, if we take Jesus' teachings on the vine and the branches and producing fruit, there are two responsibilities that we have for individual and collective growth. And that is, number one, to remain with Jesus, and later, number two will be to produce fruit. I don't like vague phrases that I'm not going to, we're going to dive into what these things mean. We're going to define them very clearly. And then I'm going to give you practical steps that you can take out of this room this morning with you. If you want to see personal growth in your relationship with Jesus, if you want to see growth in this church, number one, you have to remain with Jesus. Before we dive into it and define remain with Jesus, he opens this teaching with the phrase, I am the true vine. Because in 2024, church, don't you know that there are so many false vines that people try to attach themselves to find meaning, and they all lead to disappointment and frustration and dead ends. Whether it be tarot cards to try to tell your future, colorful rocks to determine your mood, the shape of the stars that make a little horse that determine your entire existence. Maybe it's pornography, maybe it's yourself. There are so many false vines that try to compete for your mind and your thoughts. But Jesus says, I am the true vine. There is only one true vine that leads to life. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. So if we're going to remain with Jesus, let's talk about what that means. Now, I didn't take Greek and Hebrew in college. I'm not that smart, okay? So what I'm about to tell you, I read in a book. But when something in the Bible repeats itself 2, 3, 4, 7 times, we should probably pay attention to it because the Bible's trying to tell us something. But Jesus uses this Greek word, minnow, or minnow, I don't really know. Maybe it's like the fish, minnow. But he uses this word 10 times to say, remain in me. And it can mean things like stay or dwell, but I'm reading this book right now. He points out another definition where it could mean to make your home in. And so essentially what Jesus is saying when he says, remain with me, he's saying, let me make my home in you as you make your home in me. And so I'm reading this book called Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, and he says, the truth is, we all remain in something, don't we? There's always something that's competing for our thoughts and our minds and the things that we adhere to, right? And he says, the truth is, what you remain in determines, foreshadowing the rest of the message, the type of fruit that you produce. For example, maybe you make your home in social media and allow social media to make its home in you. Then the fruit that you produce might be angry and anxious and arrogant and distracted. Or maybe you make your home in streaming services and allow streaming services to make their home in you. Then the fruit that you produce might be lustful and restless and bored and never present in the moment. Or maybe you try to make your home in hedonism or self-indulgence, and you allow it to make its home in you. Then your fruit might be compulsive, addictive. You may find yourself running from your problems, which simultaneously is running from your healing. But if you allow Jesus to make his home in you and you make your home in Jesus, then the fruit that you produce might be, I don't know, the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. No, I don't have that memorized. I had to read it. Let me ask you, church, which one of those things sounds like the person that you want to be remembered for? When you're hanging out with people and you leave and there's people conversing about you in a room that you're not in, how do you want to be described to the people that you're around? So let me define it. Let's put some real words to what we're saying here. Allowing Jesus to make his home in us as we make our home in him. I'm defining that as more than momentary prayer. It's not from the moment I close my eyes to the moment I say amen. It's making Jesus part of my lifestyle. Paul in Ephesians refers to it as prayer without ceasing. American author A.W. Tozer describes it as habitual, conscious communion. Back to John Mark Comer real quick. He says, think of it like this. It's like waking up in the morning and understanding that when you're eating your breakfast, you're doing so in the presence of Jesus. Or when you get into your car and you're driving to work, you're doing so in the presence of Jesus. And the book even says this, which spoke clearly to me. Even when you're changing diapers, and sometimes it's hard, because I think a demon done came out, you know what I'm saying? I said, babe, I didn't write any jokes. She said, you'll find a way, you know. Church, prayer is an always open communication with our Creator. We will talk with Him, and He will talk with us. And we will meet with Him, and He will meet with us. And so you might be thinking, TJ, I want that. I want Jesus to not just be a moment of my day or a moment of my week that I come in here. I want Jesus to be a part of my lifestyle. I want Jesus to make His home in me so that I can make my home in Him and produce that fruit. How do you do that? Number one, I would tell you, never give up. Never give up. You might be thinking like, well, TJ, I try to read my Bible through in a year and I've already failed. Listen. Following Jesus and making it part of your lifestyle is not a New Year's resolution. If you've already failed at that, that's okay. Just start over or pick up where you left off. If you miss an episode of the Bible Recap podcast, it's okay. You can catch up right where you are. Spotify saves your progress. Never give up. It's not a New Year's resolution. And form new habits. I think the problem is we form habits and they become monotonous and then we give up on them. Form a new habit. Listen to someone new. Take a different route to work. Whatever you need to do to form a habit, just don't give up on making Jesus part of your lifestyle. Number two, prune away what doesn't produce the fruit that you want. Now, Jesus says in this teaching, He says, like, even the branches that are growing, even the branches that are producing fruit, like they're going to be pruned so that they can produce even better fruit. So maybe you've gotten a rhythm and you're like, TJ, I haven't missed the episode of the Bible Recap podcast. That's awesome. But if there's anything keeping you from being the person that God has called you to be, then you need to prune away what doesn't produce the fruit that you want. Maybe that's bad habits. Maybe that's distractions. Maybe, church, it's people that you need to prune away for a season, maybe forever. I don't know. And number three, John Mark Comer talks about finding your secret place. Find your secret place. He points out that the first thing that Jesus teaches us about prayer isn't what to pray, but it's where to pray. And he says, go into a room by yourself, close the door, and spend time in the presence of your Father. Now, we know that Jesus also led by example, once again, that He would oftentimes withdraw to secret, quiet places to pray, to refocus, and to recenter His life. And John Mark Comer says, his quote is, we need to learn how to hide. Now, I have one kid, and he can't even walk yet. I can't imagine, some of you guys have multiple kids, what that might mean to try to learn how to hide. But stay with me, because I believe it could be one of two things. I believe finding your secret place could be one of two things. Number one, it could be a place. It could be a room in your house where you can go and close the door, light a candle, turn off the lights, sit cross-legged on the floor, and just meditate on being in the presence of Jesus and recenter and refocus for that day. Maybe it's in your car before you get out and go into work. It shouldn't be your car before you go into your home, but you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes we got to sit there for a minute. Breathe. Maybe it's a place, but also church, maybe it's our posture. Maybe it's our posture. When was the last time you spent time on your knees in the presence of Jesus? I'm telling you, just something as simple as changing your posture in prayer by getting on your knees and allowing God to speak with you can be huge. Maybe it's praying with open hands to receive what the Lord might be saying to you in that moment. I'm telling you, church, it's powerful if you just change your posture when you're praying to the Lord. Now, speaking of secret places, I think prayer rooms in churches can be super lame. That might be a little jarring for you, but every church that I've been to that had a, quote, prayer room, nobody uses it. It's kind of just a closet. But what I'm excited about here at the Grove is that when the construction finally finishes out here, which is we're not too far away, is that the room that I can actually see all the way to the back wall in will be partially our prayer room. And it's not just a room that's going to collect dust. It's going to be used for other things, but the prayer part of this room is going to be guided. There's going to be interactive stations if you need it. It's going to be set up to produce that type of environment where you can speak with Jesus and He can speak with you. And this isn't just a Sunday and Wednesday thing. If you need access to that room, if that room needs to become your secret place, you tell us, and we will make sure that you can use that room as your secret place. So remain with Jesus. Allow Jesus to make His home in you, and you make your home in Him. If you want to see individual growth in your faith, in your families, and even here at church. The second thing is we have to produce fruit. Boom. There's another vague phrase that we're going to define in just a moment, but real quick before I do, I want to talk about the urgency of the language that Jesus uses to talk about branches producing fruit. Jesus says that if a branch is not producing fruit, my Father, the gardener, will cut that branch away and throw it on the ground. And later it'll be picked up and be burned. Now, I'm not a doomsday preacher at all. But when I went to my first commentary, what it pointed out is that every time Jesus uses this kind of language to talk about and paint a fiery picture, He's not necessarily talking about hell, but He is talking about some kind of judgment. And so producing fruit is very valuable. But he does point out this point, the commentator does say that genuine salvation is usually evidenced by the fruit that they produce. So maybe those people were faking, they didn't really have a personal connection with Jesus, but I'll say this, let's define it. Producing fruit, defined, if we're going to be the branch, means that we are actively growing. We are seeking opportunities to grow. We are actively growing in 3 different areas. Number 1, physically. I've been hitting the gym, can you tell? I couldn't think of a better word for that, church, so let me tell you what I mean by physically. Physically, I mean taking care of each other's physical needs. I think, church, we do a pretty good job of that. Every week I see somebody like, hey, something is broken in my house, can I get somebody to come look at it? And even if we can't, we find someone who can. Great job. We take care of each other's physical needs, and we're going to continue to do so. And I'm going to tell you, we're trying to find a streamlined way of doing that so that everybody can get the physical help that they need. The second thing we need to be actively growing in is spiritually. Individually and as a church, we need to be actively growing spiritually. We need to be seeking to deepen our understanding of the Holy Scriptures. We need to be seeking the will of the Holy Spirit on a much deeper level. And if we're not doing that individually and as a church, then we're not growing. And the third way we need to be growing actively is numerically. Numerically. I know. Somebody just twitched. And inevitably, someone is going to come up and they're going to say, TJ, it's not about the numbers. And I would argue the church is most definitely about the numbers. Because every single seat that's filled in this place is a story. And every single story is an opportunity for the gospel to radically transform their lives, to heal their marriages, to provide peace in troubled times that they've never experienced. So don't tell me it's not about the numbers, church. All three of these things I took straight from Acts 2:42 through 47, which, if you know, we are a restoration movement church. We look to that passage, the original church, as a way of us restoring ourselves back to the way they used to do it. And all three of those things are mentioned in Acts 2:42 through 47. So don't tell me it's not about the numbers when Luke explicitly says the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. When I was 18, I got a vote in my very first presidential election. Whoop, whoop. Times were different back then. But someone told me, you cannot be a Christian and vote for blank. You know what I did? I voted for blank. I'm not going to tell you. You can probably figure it out. Because I hated that phrase, man. I hated the fact that someone would really tell me that I can't be a Christian and like there's something that would disqualify me from being a Christian as simplistic as American politics in the grand scheme of eternity. But I'm willing to revisit that statement, church, because I believe that maybe you can't be a Christian and not produce fruit. Now, David, we had an elders meeting last Sunday, and David shared a quote with us that he heard at a conference. Sorry if you were going to use this in a sermon coming up. I'm hijacking it. But the quote that he heard was, the most selfish thing a church can do is not grow. Because, church, if y'all are hearing the same gospel that we are preaching every single week, you want everyone to have access to that message. Let's dive back into a couple things. I'm gonna just paraphrase some of the things that Jesus said. In verse 10, he talks about, if you remain in me, then you obey my commands. What were Jesus' commands? I don't know. Maybe take care of each other and tell everyone the good news. In verse 11, he talks about your joy. He wants his joy to exist in you so that your joy may be complete. Actively growing in these areas is not supposed to be exasperating. It should be exciting about what the future could hold. Verse 12, he says, love one another. Love each other. Church, let me say this. There's a lot of changes happening at the Grove. Remember to love each other. We're on the same team. I saw a TikTok recently where this smaller church, the pastor said, people keep asking me what I think about this mega church who just planted a campus down the street from me. I hope they blow the roof off every single week because people forget that we're on the same team. Verse 13 is where I want to get to. I'm going to read it for you one more time. He says this, Jesus, the greatest leader to ever live on this planet, who always led by example, says this, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. I would tell you, church, don't talk about it, be about it. Jesus was about it. That night, he would be arrested and set in motion the end of his life. He knew that he was going to sacrifice himself for the entire planet. And he says there's no greater example of loving someone than sacrificing yourself for them. Everyone in this church will talk about growth. I wish we were busting at the seams every single week. But church, let me ask you, we all talk about growth, but are we willing to sacrifice our comforts and our preferences to be about it? And that's the songs that we sing, the cool stuff that we do with the lights, that's the projects that we undertake, that's the change in how we do communion. Are we willing to sacrifice a bit of ourselves so that someone else can come in and encounter Jesus in a new, life-changing way? Because the way that I came to a relationship with Jesus is vastly different than the way you did and the way the person sitting next to you did. We can't keep doing the same old things. Growth equals numbers, and numbers equals stories, and everyone encounters Jesus on a different level. And we got to keep going until the whole planet has heard the gospel. I've heard people say, I wish we'd go back to the good old days. We can't, church. It's far too dangerous to slow down or stop or go backwards because there's too many souls at stake that need to hear the gospel. And until every soul on this planet has heard the good news of Jesus, we can't stop changing up the way we do things because everyone experiences Jesus on a different level. You guys with me in this? 3 people? Great. It's going to be tough because it's going to be tough. So how do I do that? Let me give you some practical things. I told you, you can take with you today. If you want to help grow, the things I'm about to say, if you want to grow individually in your faith and you want to disregard everything else I said today and you're like, I kind of like our church the way it is, I'm telling you, you'll get something out of this. But church, if you really want to see the growth explode and be the church that God has called it to be in 2024 and beyond, these are the things that we have to do. The first thing we have to do is serve. Serve. Our children's ministry is booming right now. And Kayla needs some volunteers to help with that. Or one of y'all are going to have to preach and lead worship because me and David are going to be back there working with the kids. And they don't want that. Kayla said, no, please. Seriously, hey, listen, you have to pass a background check. You have to love being in the presence of children. We need consistent, punctual volunteers to show up and love those children. You know why the young adults are booming right now in this church, the young families? Because we love our kids. I'm not trying to brag, but they say millennials are the best generation of dads because we're present. We need people to join us in loving our children and volunteer in our children's ministry. The student ministry and the worship ministry are 2 other areas that you can serve. Guys, you heard me earlier. I'm in charge of both of those ministries. I can't do it all by myself. I need your help. So if you want to invest in the lives of teenagers for the rest of the school year, come talk. You also have to pass a background check. We protect our children and students at all costs. But come talk to me if you want to volunteer and invest in the lives of our teenagers. Worship ministry. If you can't play an instrument or sing, that's okay. This doesn't happen without my people in the back. And this doesn't happen with the people who constantly pray for our ministry. This can't happen. We're going to have a meeting very soon where we talk about Christmas decorations. You're like, already? Yes, already, because we have a big vision for what we want that to be. I can't do it all alone. So student ministry, worship ministry, First Connections ministry. You remember the first time you ever came to the Grove, who greeted you in the parking lot, or who made you a cup of coffee, who walked you to your seat, who followed up with you. You don't have to have been a member of the Grove your entire life to volunteer in our First Connections ministry. If you've been here for 2 weeks, we'll find a place for you. And lastly, join or lead a growth group if you want to grow. If you want to see this church become the church that God has called it to be. But also, like I said, church, if you want to grow spiritually, serve somewhere. Now, I had dinner with my friends, the Ortons. They're probably like, please no. And I said, guys, listen, this is kind of the meat of the message. Like, help me fill it out a little bit. What does a church have to do to, quote, produce fruit? And they said, serve. I said, that's my number 1 point. That's awesome. We're on the same wavelength. Let's break it down even further. And I love this quote that Jill gave me. She said, I asked her if I could use it. I asked her if I could write it down. So I'm using it. She said this. I'm sorry, Jill. I love you. She said, I think what keeps a lot of people from serving sometimes is they think that if they volunteer somewhere, they're stuck there. And I want you to know, church, that you're not. If you're like, hey, you know what? TJ's message is lighting a fire in my soul. I'm going to give children's ministry a go. And it's not for you. We can find somewhere else for you to serve where you will have the joy that Jesus spoke about. Remember, you can take a season off if you're burned out. But you can never retire for good. The second thing is be unifying. There it is. Be unifying. Jesus said, love one another. Remember, we're on the same team. Look, man, just don't be that guy or girl. Don't go around saying, man, I really wish we would have done a different color on these walls. Like, don't be that person. Don't be that person that says, well, you know, I don't really like it, but just don't. You know what my grandmother always said? If you ain't got something nice to say, shut up. Yeah, exactly. Church, be unifying. We are on the same team. Our goal is that you and the people that you love and the people who are far from God come into that life-changing relationship with Him. Trust me, we're not painting the walls different colors to upset you. Number 3, get hype. Can you tell I'm a millennial? Get hype. Man, God is doing incredible things here at the Grove. He really is. Have you seen the kids being born lately? The baptisms we've had lately, the level of the worship team lately is incredible. God is doing amazing things here, church. Get excited. You know, my first 2 youth ministries more than doubled in less than a year. And people would always say, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm not doing anything, man. The students are getting jacked about what God is doing here. And they're the ones telling their friends and bringing their neighbors. They're the ones that are doing it. Church, you want to see this church grow? Get hype about what God is doing here. And your friends and your family and your neighbors and your coworkers, they will take note if you're excited about what God is doing here. We call it the young adult growth group, but listen, in January, this growth group is going to, y'all hate the word split. It's going to turn into 2 different growth groups because it's just booming right now. And so the college and younger crowd needs a group. And the young families need a group. And that's another growth group. Church, we need someone to step in and help lead these groups. And it's all good because we are booming. And the reason that demographic is the fastest growing demographic in this congregation right now is we're just excited, man. All our kids are growing up together. We're getting hype about what's going on. We're having worship nights together. Y'all can do that. Y'all can do that. Get excited. The last thing is this: commit to being here. Commit to being here. When Jesus talks about vines and branches and gardeners, and later that night, he and his disciples would go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. He's talking about a vineyard. And so these vines produce branches, these branches produce grapes, and grapes produce sweet, sweet wine. I'm learning. I'm extending my palate. I'm trying wine, okay? Grapes don't grow alone. Grapes don't grow alone, church. You were never created to live this life or do this life in isolation. If you want to see growth, commit to being here. We can't do it without you. We need you on this team. So, church, I like to just give you like physical challenges. Like, I'm going to tell you straight up. I kept thinking, I want to challenge our people to reach a certain number on a regular Sunday morning. Like, not Easter, not Christmas, like this number. And I had this number in my mind of hey, this is it. And then I actually looked at our attendance over the last 6 months, and I realized that one Sunday we were only 1 off from that. And at first I'm like, hey, that's cool. We don't really have a long way to go. And then I thought, what a disservice to God if we don't dream a little bit bigger for what He can do here. And so I'm not going to tell you the number. But I have it written down right here, and it's highlighted. And when we do, church, we're going to celebrate and blow the roof off this church. Not really. We love this roof. It's great. All right, I'm going to close with this. My stopwatch didn't start, so I don't really know exactly how far I've been going. This is what I want to close with, is that rabbis did not choose disciples. If you wanted to be a disciple of a rabbi, you would study, and you would go to him, and you would say, hey, I want to learn how you do things, how you think about things. Will you take me in? And they would say either yay or nay. But not Jesus. He found his disciples. He found exactly who he wanted, and he called them to follow him. And he says in this text, he says, just remember that I chose you, and I appointed you. Church, Jesus chose us, and he appointed us to this space and time to make a difference. All right, church, you want some next steps? Here we go. Sometimes I don't do this because I feel like I can't come up with good stuff, but here we go. If you want to restore, find new ways to remain with Jesus, to make your home in him and he make his home in you, because everything that we talked about hinges on that first. Number 2, if you want to thrive, be a part of the Grove, man. Be here. Be here. And if you want to see this church, if you want to see your family, if you want to see multiply happen, some math teacher somewhere just said multiplication. Do something. You have to do something. If we read the words of Jesus just like they are, you have to do something. So if you want to see growth, church, you have to remain with Jesus and you have to produce fruit. And we're going to give you a chance to respond to this message in the next few minutes in one of 2 ways. The first way is maybe you've never heard that the creator of everything loves you so much that he sent his son to die on the cross so that we can be reconciled in a relationship with him. If you've never known that, in just a second after I pray, 2 people, Jim and Jennifer Kelsey, are going to be in the back of the room. These are two people that I love tremendously with my whole heart and would trust them to have this conversation with absolutely anyone. And if that's you, when we're done, find them in the back of the room. Jim's wearing a cool plaid shirt. And just say, I want to know what my next steps are. The other demographic is, if you do know that to be true, then during the next few moments, Matthew's going to play softly, and communion is going to be available for you on stations in the front and in the back. We ask you to just make your way to those tables, grab the bread, grab the cup, step to the side, pray by yourself, pray with your family if you want to. Listen, sometimes there's traffic jams. Just hold on. We will wait. We will wait, church, because this right here is the most important thing that we will do all morning long. Celebrate the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. So, church, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to ask you to just hold your hands out and receive what the Lord might have to say to us this morning. Let's change our posture. Jesus, thank you so much for the sacrifice that you made for us. Thank you for the challenges and the convictions that you've laid on our heart. That if we're truly to follow you, that step one, we just have to be with you. You came to be with us. Allow us to just be with you. Lord, I pray that as a church, as a body, that we would take these words to heart, that we would do everything that we can to produce fruit, to actively grow, to be the branch that you've called us to be, to produce that fruit that people can't resist. God, I thank you for this church. I thank you for the calling that you've put on us to go bigger, to do better, to reach farther. And God, I pray that in everything that we do, that you would equip us and guide us, that every step we take is one that's directly behind you. And Lord, I thank you for communion. I thank you that we can come to this table, that we can celebrate that sacrifice that you made, that we could never make for ourselves, so that we could be reconciled into that relationship with you. I pray for us over the next few moments that we would just embrace your presence in this place today. God, we love you and we need you so, so very much. Amen.